Today we're going to start looking at the Document Object Model, the DOM. And what the DOM is the browser's internal representation of everything that appears on the web page. Every item in the structure and the content of the web page is represented as a JavaScript object in the browser. This is the Document Object Model, and you have access to this as a JavaScript programmer. All of the markup on the page is represented in the DOM. The tags, the attributes, the styles, the text, everything that's there. And objects know about the relationships between themselves and other nearby objects. They know about the ones that contain them, they know about the ones that they contain, and other ones that are at the same level in the document that they are. And this is represented as a tree. So I've got objects that contain other objects, which contain other objects. And manipulating these objects lets you do all the cool things that you're used to seeing on web pages. You can change the content of these objects, you can move them around, you can change the structure, you can create new elements and add them to the page, you can change the appearance by changing styles and position and other things about objects on the tree. You can make them respond to user behavior. That's the power of the DOM. So let's take a look at what this might look like for a simple document. Now here we have a block of HTML. It's fairly simple. And this is the DOM tree as it might relate, well, as it does relate to the document that we're looking at here. So you can see we have containing everything as an HTML element. And here that is on the page. That's the document element. And then within the HTML, it really has two children. There's a head and there's a body. And here we see them on the tree diagram. Now inside the head, we have a link element. And here that link element is shown as a descendant of the head. And inside the body, you can see there's an H3 and a div. And here they are, the H3 and the div. Now, these relationships are referred to as parents and children. And the H3 and the div are considered siblings because they're sitting at the same level of the hierarchy right under the body. And you can see inside this div, I've got a certain amount of text that appears here, right up until I get to another tag, which is the I tag for italics. And so that shows up as a child of div. And so in this way, we can actually walk from one node to another and find things in the document when we want them. Each box that we see on the document is referred to as a node. Now, there are different types of nodes that can appear in a document. The yellow boxes that you see here are element nodes, and basically these represent the tags that make up the HTML document. And between element nodes, and as children of element nodes, you often see text nodes. So in this case, let's look at what we have. We've got an H3 element, and the H3 appears here as an element node. And as a child of that H3 element, we've got a block of text. That block of text shows up as a text node in our DOM tree. You can see the same thing happening here with div. We've got a div tag, which is represented here, and then we've got a bunch of text, and that text runs right up until it hits the next tag, and we have it right here. Here we can see in this text node the text that appears here until we get to the I tag, and then the I tag has its own text node, which happens to contain the word italics, and then finally we have another text node that completes what's there as a child of the div. You could say that this text node, the I tag, and this text node, or this text node, this element node, and this text node are siblings under this div. Now, it turns out it's actually a little more complicated than that. There's a lot more text nodes on the page that you don't necessarily see. And what we're looking at here is that these text nodes pretty much just contain white space. Take a look at our HTML. We can see here, let's say between the head and the body tag. Between the head and the body tag, I've actually got white space. It's a carriage return or a line feed or whichever character it is that indicates body should appear on the next line. And it turns out that that appears as a text node, and you can see it right here. This head, this text node, and this body are actually siblings under the HTML document element. Now, when you're looking through Firebug or the Chrome debugger, very often these empty text nodes, or I shouldn't say they're empty because they have white space in them, a text node with white space in it won't necessarily appear in that listing just for convenience, because you could imagine this thing getting to be very complex and it gets to be a big mess very quickly with nodes that you don't need to do anything with. So you can get to them in the code, but you usually won't see them by default in the debugger because they're just not that helpful to look at. But in fact, if I had taken this body tag and this head tag and put them on the same line with no white space between them, this text node wouldn't be here. So this tree can get awfully big awfully quickly. I mean, you can look at this and see that there's not a lot of HTML here, and the tree's already getting pretty complicated. So how do we actually get elements from the DOM? Well, we've been using, so far in this course, getElementById. And there's a few other getElementBy methods that you might have seen associated with the document. GetElements by tag name, by class name, and so forth. And that's great if you want to dive right in on one particular element sitting in a page. You know what it's called, you know what its ID is, and you just dive in there and get it. But the other thing that you can do, and this is useful in different cases, is you can follow the tree. And by walking around using code, you can walk around the relationships, the parent, the child, and so forth, and actually find things and understand the structure of the page in a way that getElementById doesn't help you. So there's two basic ways, well, there's a bunch of ways, but we're going to focus right now on two ways of using the child relationships and parent relationships to be able to find your way around the DOM. Now, one property that every element has on the page, that every element node has on the page, is something called child nodes. And child nodes is an array-like object, and we'll get to in a little while why it's array-like and not exactly an array. But when I call it array-like, it's because you can use square bracket notation to find your way along the array, and you can iterate over it in a for loop and so forth. And what it contains is all of the element nodes and text nodes associated with this element. So in this case, if I do document.body.child nodes, I get an array that contains these 5 elements. There's 3 text nodes and there's 2 element nodes. And here's what it would look like to access these in code. It would be document.child nodes and then square brackets 0, square brackets 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that would be these 5 elements. Now we can also use the array-like property of a DOM element called children. And what children will do is it'll skip the text nodes and it'll just get you from one tag to the next. So you can quickly crawl the structure of a tree without having to worry about all the text nodes until perhaps, let's say, you find the tag that you're looking for. So what would this look like in code? Well, very simply, it would look like this. We've got a for loop, and the for loop is going over our child nodes array. We'll call it an array for now. And then you can see that I can do something like, output each of these child node objects to an output element or something like that. You can basically dereference them using the square bracket notation just like you would an array to get to every element on the page. And we're going to continue to look at how we can traverse, if you will, walk the document object model tree to find things that we want to in a page.